The light switch in the main server closet made a hollow, metallic click as I shut it off. It was the exact same sound I had heard 18 years ago, when I set up the very first server rack in this building. Back then, this company was just a 4-person operation working in a hot, cramped office that smelled like stale coffee, solder, and cheap pizza. I was the one who designed the initial database architecture, ran the Ethernet cables along the baseboards, and hand-soldered the first backup batteries. Now, those same racks filled a massive, state-of-the-art, temperature-controlled facility worth millions. But my hand was no longer on the controls. I stood in the corridor, holding a single cardboard box containing my favorite coffee mug, my desk plants, and a framed photo of my daughter, Clara Hennessy. She was 20 now, in her sophomore year at college, studying mechanical engineering. The thought of her tuition was the only thing that made my hands shake. As I walked toward the elevator, Audrey Collins, our newly appointed chief executive officer, had slid the termination papers across the boardroom table less than 45 minutes ago. She was only 34, a product of business school grooming who viewed technology as a line item on a balance sheet rather than a complex web of engineering. Her previous role at a retail conglomerate had taught her how to cut budgets, but it had not taught her how to manage infrastructure. She had not even looked at me when she spoke, her fingers flying across her tablet. She was young, sharp-suited, and eager to impress the new investment board. She had not even looked at me when she spoke, her fingers flying across her tablet. "Your technology director has persuaded me that your infrastructure design is obsolete," she said, her voice clipped, professional, and entirely devoid of human warmth. "We are restructuring the engineering department. Your role is redundant." Julian Mercer, the technology director she brought in 3 years ago, was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He had a smug smile on his face, the look of a man who had finally cleared his path of the only obstacle. Mercer had been trying to replace my proprietary server configuration since his first day. He was the kind of director who managed by spreadsheet, hiring cheap, inexperienced contractors and using off-the-shelf software packages that looked impressive in slide decks but failed under real stress. He could not stand that a 55-year-old engineer understood systems he could not even begin to comprehend. He could not stand that a 55-year-old engineer understood systems he could not even begin to comprehend. The company had grown from a tiny startup into a regional enterprise handling the infrastructure for some of the largest medical providers in the Midwest. When I started, we were running database operations on refurbished hardware that I bought off eBay. I had spent countless nights sleeping on a cot in the server room, waking up every 2 hours to monitor the temperature gauges. We did not have automated cooling systems back then. I had to manually adjust the window air conditioners to keep the hardware from frying. Terrence, the old founder who retired last year, used to bring me coffee at 3 a.m. and talk about how we were going to change the industry. We built this business on trust, hard work, and my custom architecture. But the new board of directors did not care about history. They only cared about the quarterly valuation and how quickly they could package the company for a lucrative buyout. To them, I was just a costly legacy employee, a relic of the past that needed to be cleared out to optimize the payroll. They had no idea that they were removing the only pillar holding up the roof. "Any questions?" Audrey had asked, her eyes briefly flicking up, clearly wanting me to sign and leave quickly. I had looked at the papers, then at Mercer. "Just one," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Who is going to manage the adaptive load cycling protocol tonight?" Mercer had chuckled, stepping forward. "We are overriding that outdated system at midnight. We are moving to a standard always-on architecture. Modern cloud environments do not need sleep." I had looked at him, feeling a mix of pity and warning. "Our hardware uses 40% less energy and has 70% fewer physical failures because of that cycling protocol. Servers are like human muscles. They need periods of reduced load to rest, cool down, and clear system cache. If you run them hot and continuous, they will burn." Mercer waved his hand. "That is your pet theory, Hennessy. We need maximum uptime, not academic experiments." I had nodded, signed the papers without a fight, and stood up. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten them. Over my 18 years of working with various executives, I had learned that shouting never solved a technical dispute. The code would always reveal the truth, and Mercer's arrogance was about to provide a masterclass in failure. I simply said, "I wish you both the best of luck." Now, as the elevator doors closed on my 18 years of service, I felt a strange sense of quiet. I walked out of the building into the cool autumn air of Chicago. I did not call anyone. I did not complain. I drove home, put my box on the kitchen counter, and cooked dinner. I knew the systems better than anyone. I had designed them to be self-sustaining, but I also knew that Mercer's arrogance was about to collide head-on with the laws of thermodynamics. The core operating system of our server network was built on my proprietary code, which was patented under my independent company, Apex Digital Architecture LLC. When the founders and I started this business, we had a verbal agreement that we would later draft a formal intellectual property assignment. We never did. For 18 years, they had operated under an implied, revocable license. I had pointed this out to the board in writing twice over the past 5 years, but they were always too busy with fundraising rounds to clean up their legal paperwork. Under United States copyright law, specifically 17 U.S.C. Section 204A, a transfer of copyright ownership is completely invalid unless it is executed in writing and signed by the owner of the rights. I still owned the foundation of their entire digital empire, and they had just locked me out of the building. I poured a glass of whiskey, sat in my favorite armchair, and waited for the clock to strike midnight. My phone sat on the coffee table, silent and dark. I knew it would not stay that way for long. The countdown had already begun. The first notification arrived at 12:14 a.m. It was a standard system alert, routed to my personal email, because I had never removed my emergency contact address from the database notification loop. The primary database cluster in our Detroit center was showing an operating temperature of 88 degrees Celsius. The normal operating temperature under my load cycling system was 52 degrees. 10 minutes later, the alert turned red. The secondary cluster was failing to authenticate incoming traffic. The automated load balancer, trying to handle the traffic without the cycling protocol, was pushing all requests to a single server cluster that was already thermal throttling. By 1:30 a.m., the alerts were coming in every 30 seconds. The company website was down. The client dashboard was throwing database connection errors. At 3:17 a.m., my phone began to vibrate. It was Julian Mercer. I watched the screen light up, his name flashing in the dark room. He was calling from the headquarters office, no doubt surrounded by panicking junior engineers. I let it ring. He called 3 more times, his persistence growing more desperate with each attempt. When he finally stopped, the notifications from Audrey Collins started. She sent 5 text messages in a row. "Roger, we have an emergency. The databases are locked. The client portal is completely offline. Call us immediately." I did not reply. I took a slow sip of my water, reading the error logs on my personal monitor. The system was performing exactly as I had designed it to. When the server temperature exceeded safe limits and the load balancer detected continuous 100% load for more than 3 hours, the security module assumed a denial-of-service attack and automatically locked down the database encryption keys. I watched the screen light up, his name flashing in the dark room. I let it ring. He called 3 more times, his persistence growing more desperate with each attempt. When he finally stopped, the notifications from Audrey Collins started. She sent 5 text messages in a row. "Roger, we have an emergency. The databases are locked. The client portal is completely offline. Call us immediately." I did not reply. I took a slow sip of my water, reading the error logs on my personal monitor. The system was performing exactly as I had designed it to. When the server temperature exceeded safe limits and the load balancer detected continuous 100% load for more than 3 hours, the security module assumed a denial-of-service attack and automatically locked down the database encryption keys. Sitting in my dark study, I reviewed the licensing paperwork Felix and I had compiled. The company had spent years ignoring our reminders because they thought I was a loyal company man who would never use my IP as leverage. In their minds, my work was their property. But our initial contract was clear. The core modules of the database system, including the proprietary self-healing algorithms, remained the sole property of Apex Digital Architecture LLC. We had only granted them a revocable, non-exclusive license that was contingent on the founders finalizing my equity assignment. Since the equity assignment was never completed due to their constant corporate reorganizations, the license remained revocable at my discretion. I had sent emails in 2021, 2023, and earlier this year requesting a formal meeting to resolve the issue. Each time, the executive team had brushed me off with automated promises of future meetings. They had treated my IP like a public utility, and now the utility was turned off. At 4:30 a.m., Mercer called again. This time I answered. "Roger!" he hissed, his voice cracking with panic. "What did you do to the system? The servers are overheating and the entire database is locked from the inside. Fix this right now or we will sue you." I leaned back, keeping my voice calm. "Julian, I did not do anything. That is the problem. You overrode the load cycling protocol at midnight. The servers ran at full capacity, overheated, and the automated security system locked the database to prevent hardware damage and data corruption. It is a standard safety feature." Mercer swore loudly. "We have our junior engineers trying to bypass the lock, but they cannot access the encryption keys." "Where are they?" "They are stored on a secure verification server owned by my company, Apex Digital Architecture LLC, I said. "Your engineers cannot access them because you revoked my credentials. The license key is verified through my server." Mercer was breathing heavily. "This is sabotage, Hennessy. You planned this." I laughed softly. "No, Julian. This is thermodynamics. The laws of physics do not care about your corporate hierarchy or your transition schedules. The specifications were documented in 14 different system manuals that you signed off on. You just never bothered to read them. If you try to force a bypass, you will corrupt the database partition. And since Apex Digital Architecture LLC owns the copyright to that security module under federal law, any unauthorized modification of that code is a direct violation of 17 U.S.C. Section 501. I suggest you consult your legal team before your engineers touch another line of code." I hung up the phone and turned it to silent. The company was losing approximately $50,000 a minute in client transactions. By the time the business day started, the financial damage would be catastrophic. The specifications were documented in 14 different system manuals that you signed off on. You just never bothered to read them. If you try to force a bypass, you will corrupt the database partition. And since Apex Digital Architecture LLC owns the copyright to that security module under federal law, any unauthorized modification of that code is a direct violation of 17 U.S.C. Section 501. I suggest you consult your legal team before your engineers touch another line of code. I hung up the phone and turned it to silent. The company was losing approximately $50,000 a minute in client transactions. By the time the business day started, the financial damage would be catastrophic. At 7 a.m., Audrey Collins called. Her voice had none of the cold, clipped efficiency from the day before. "Roger, please," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "The board is calling an emergency meeting. We have 12 major healthcare clients whose billing portals are completely offline. They cannot verify insurance policies for incoming patients. The liability is massive. We need you to come back as a consultant. Name your price." I stared at the photo of my daughter Clara. I thought about the 18 years I had spent building that company, only to be discarded like a piece of old hardware. "I want 40% of whatever this outage has already cost the company paid as an upfront consultation fee," I said. "That is the emergency rate for a disaster recovery specialist." Audrey gasped. "That is almost $3 million. That is the price of ignoring design specifications," I replied. "Let me know when the board signs the consulting agreement. I will be waiting at my attorney's office." The server room at headquarters looked like a war zone when I walked in at 10 a.m. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and overheated plastic. Several technicians were huddled around the main console, their faces pale and exhausted. The primary database rack was emitting a loud, high-pitched whine, a sign that the hard drives were struggling under the thermal load. The air conditioning unit in the corner was blowing hot air, unable to dissipate the heat generated by the always-on server configuration. Julian, Mercer, was standing in the corner, his shirt sleeves rolled up, arguing with a database administrator. Audrey Collins stood near the entrance, Her arms crossed tightly, her eyes bloodshot. When she saw me walk in with my attorney, Valerie Higgins, she let out a visible sigh of relief. "Roger, thank you for coming," she said, stepping forward. "We have signed the emergency consulting agreement. The wire transfer of $2.8 million has been initiated to your Apex Digital Architecture account. Please tell us how to unlock the database." Julian Mercer was standing in the corner, his shirt sleeves rolled up, arguing with a database administrator. Audrey Collins stood near the entrance, her arms crossed tightly, her eyes bloodshot. When she saw me walk in with my attorney, Valerie Higgins, she let out a visible sigh of relief. "Roger, thank you for coming," she said, stepping forward. "We have signed the emergency consulting agreement. The wire transfer of $2.8 million has been initiated to your Apex Digital Architecture account. Please tell us how to unlock the database." I walked to the main terminal, bypassing Mercer, who glared at me but did not say a word. I pulled up the system status monitor. The primary database cluster was running at 94 degrees Celsius. The cooling system was running at maximum capacity, but could not keep up with the continuous processing load. I turned to the technicians. "Shut down the primary database cluster immediately," I said. The administrator blinked. "Shut it down? We will lose the remaining connection logs. If you keep running it at this temperature for another hour, you will physically melt the storage controllers," I said. "The system needs a complete 12-hour cool-down period. We must shut down all server racks to let the hardware reset." Audrey stepped closer, her face turning pale. "A 12-hour shutdown will cost us another $5 million in lost business." "Yes," I said, "and it is the only way to save your physical hardware. If you do not shut it down, the damage will be permanent, and you will lose the data entirely." Mercer stepped forward, his face red. "This is ridiculous. We can run a cold boot recovery without shutting down the cooling units." "Go ahead, Julian," I said, stepping away from the keyboard. "If you think you know more about this infrastructure than the man who built it, take the keys. But if the storage controller fails during your cold boot, the entire database partition will be lost. And since you do not have a written transfer of the copyright under 17 U.S.C. Section 204A, you will also be personally liable for the destruction of Apex Digital Architecture property." I remembered how Mercer had dismissed my biomimetic architecture during my annual review last year. He had called it an over-engineered hobby project. He did not understand that systems, like living organisms, require a balance of activity and rest to maintain stability. My load cycling protocol worked by dynamically routing traffic between server clusters, allowing idle clusters to enter low-power states to clear cache and dissipate heat. This prevented the hardware fatigue that leads to silent data corruption and unexpected hardware crashes. Mercer thought that running the servers at 100% capacity indefinitely was the only way to scale the system. He did not realize that without the cycling protocol, the database indexes would slowly drift out of sync, leading to the massive corruption we were now seeing in the patient directories. The junior engineers had tried to run a database repair utility, but they had only succeeded in corrupting the tables further because they did not understand the underlying encryption layout. Mercer opened his mouth to argue, but Audrey cut him off. "Shut it down," she ordered the technicians. "Do it now." The server room fell into a sudden, eerie silence as the massive racks powered down one by one. The high-pitched whine subsided, replaced by the quiet hum of the auxiliary fans. Audrey turned to me. "What is the next step?" "I will begin the data recovery process from the secondary cluster," I said. "But it will take time. The continuous processing load has corrupted the database index. I will need full administrative access and my old credentials restored." "Give him whatever he needs," Audrey told the network administrator. I sat down at the console and began the recovery process. Valerie Higgins, my attorney, sat next to me, documenting every command I entered and every log I pulled. As I dug into the transaction logs, I noticed something strange. The override commands that disabled the load cycling protocol had not been automated. They were entered manually from an external terminal at 11:45 p.m. last night, and the terminal ID belonged to Julian Mercer, but that was not all. I found a series of outgoing data transfers from Mercer's account to an external cloud database. Mercer had been copying client satisfaction metrics and database schemas for the past 2 weeks. I quietly copied the logs to a secure drive and handed it to Valerie. This was not just a technical blunder, it was a coordinated exit strategy, and Mercer was planning to take the company's biggest clients with him. He wanted to force a system failure, blame it on my legacy architecture, and then present a new Zenith Systems migration plan to the board as the only savior. Valerie Higgins, my attorney, sat next to me, documenting every command I entered and every log I pulled. As I dug into the transaction logs, I noticed something strange. The override commands that disabled the load cycling protocol had not been automated. They were entered manually from an external terminal at 11:45 p.m. last night, and the terminal ID belonged to Julian Mercer. But that was not all. I found a series of outgoing data transfers from Mercer's account to an external cloud database. Mercer had been copying client satisfaction metrics and database schemas for the past 2 weeks. I quietly copied the logs to a secure drive and handed it to Valerie. This was not just a technical blunder, it was a coordinated exit strategy, and Mercer was planning to take the company's biggest clients with him. By 4 p.m., the boardroom was filled with the members of the investment board. The atmosphere was tense, the air smelling of stale coffee and anxiety. I sat at one end of the long mahogany table, with Valerie Higgins beside me. Audrey Collins and Julian Mercer sat at the other end. The board chairman, a stern man named Ellis, was looking at a printout of the financial losses. The outage had now cost the company $12 million. Our largest client, Preston Jennings of Jennings Logistics, had already threatened to cancel his contract, which accounted for 35% of our annual revenue. His warehouses were at a complete standstill because their inventory tracking systems could not connect to our servers. Ellis looked at me. "Roger, we understand you have stabilized the system for Jennings Logistics. But the rest of the enterprise clients are still offline. We need a permanent solution." Mercer stood up, adjusting his tie. "The solution is simple," he said. "We need to authorize a $7 million budget to upgrade our server hardware to an always-on redundant system. That will allow us to run without Roger's outdated cycling protocol. It will take 6 months to implement, but it will modernize our infrastructure." I looked at the board. "Or you can simply restore the original load cycling protocol, which costs $0 and has worked flawlessly for 18 years, I said. "The hardware is designed for it. The only reason it failed is because Julian manually overrode the safety protocols." Ellis leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Is this true, Julian?" Mercer shrugged. "The protocol was an outdated bottleneck. We had to move forward. It was a calculated risk. A calculated risk that cost us $12 million in 24 hours? One board member muttered. Valerie Higgins stood up, placing a folder on the table. "There is another issue the board must consider," she said. "The core software architecture of this system is owned by Roger's company, Apex Digital Architecture LLC. The implied license was revoked when he was terminated. If you continue to use his code without a signed agreement, you are committing copyright infringement. Under federal law, the board members can be held personally liable for corporate infringement." Valerie and I spent the evening at her office, reviewing the emails Mercer had sent to Nigel Thornton. The conspiracy was incredibly detailed. Mercer had promised Thornton that he could deliver 80% of our healthcare clients to Zenith Systems within 30 days of the server crash. He had even provided Zenith Systems with our proprietary database schema, allowing them to build a custom migration tool in advance. This was a clear violation of the Defend Trade Secrets Act under 18 U.S.C. Section 1836, and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act under 18 U.S.C. Section 1030. Mercer had used his administrative credentials to systematically copy proprietary files and export them to an external cloud storage account. He had also deliberately modified the security log files to cover his tracks, which constituted intentional damage to a protected computer. Valerie Higgins looked at the documents and shook her head. "This is a federal felony case, Roger. Mercer is not just going to lose his job. He is going to federal prison. I will contact the U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago tonight." The room fell silent. Ellis looked at Audrey, who looked down at her tablet, her face completely pale. The private equity representatives, led by Catherine, were staring at Mercer with cold, furious expressions. They knew that if Roger walked away and filed a copyright injunction, the company's valuation would drop to zero overnight. Under federal copyright law, specifically 17 U.S.C. Section 504, a copyright owner can seek statutory damages and an injunction to prevent the unauthorized use of their software. This was not a minor technical issue. It was an existential threat to their investment. "We want to offer you a 3-month contract to oversee the transition to a hybrid system," Ellis said, looking at me. "We will pay you a monthly consulting fee of $150,000. I smiled. "I will review the contract," I said, "but I will not sign any intellectual property transfer. Apex Digital Architecture retains full ownership." I stood up, gathered my things, and left the room. The private equity representatives were staring at Mercer with cold, furious expressions. "We want to offer you a 3-month contract to oversee the transition to a hybrid system," Ellis said, looking at me. "We will pay you a monthly consulting fee of $150,000. I smiled. "I will review the contract," I said, "but I will not sign any intellectual property transfer. Apex Digital Architecture retains full ownership." I stood up, gathered my things, and left the room. That night, as I sat in my study, my phone buzzed with an email. It was from Audrey Collins' personal email account. The subject line read, "What Julian didn't tell you." The attachment was a series of emails between Julian Mercer and a man named Nigel Thornton, the chief technology officer of our main competitor, Zenith Systems. I opened the files, my eyes widening as I read the exchanges. Mercer had been feeding proprietary system details and client lists to Thornton for months. The most damning email was sent 2 days before my termination. "Once Roger is fired, I will disable the cycling protocol," Mercer had written. "The systems will fail within 24 hours. When the clients panic, Zenith Systems can offer them emergency data migration services. We will split the acquisition commission 70% to 30%. Julian, my hands tightened around my phone. This was not just corporate politics. It was a federal crime. Mercer had deliberately sabotaged the digital infrastructure of a multi-million-dollar corporation to line his own pockets. I immediately forwarded the emails to Valerie Higgins and called her. "We have him," Valerie said, her voice sharp. "This is a direct violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act under 18 U.S.C. Section 1030 and the Defend Trade Secrets Act under 18 U.S.C. Section 1836. I will contact the federal authorities tonight. We meet the board at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Do not say a word to anyone until then." The boardroom was quiet when we arrived the next morning. Ellis was already sitting at the head of the table, looking exhausted. Audrey Collins sat next to him, her face pale. Julian Mercer was not in the room. "Before we discuss my contract," I said, placing my laptop on the table and connecting it to the projector, "Valerie Higgins has some information regarding the cause of the system failure." Valerie stepped forward and opened the email files on the screen. As the messages between Mercer and Nigel Thornton appeared on the large display, the board members stared in absolute shock. The emails detailed the entire sabotage plan, the commission splits, and the database schemas Mercer had copied. Ellis's face turned a deep, furious red. "Where is Mercer?" he demanded. "He is currently in the lobby," Valerie said calmly. "Federal agents are waiting for him. We filed a formal complaint under 18 U.S.C. Section 1030 for unauthorized system access and intentional damage, and under 18 U.S.C. Section 1836 for theft of trade secrets. He will be arrested the moment he attempts to leave the building." Audrey Collins looked like she was about to throw up. "I had no idea," she whispered. "I only found those logs on his laptop this morning when I was reviewing his communications." I looked at the board members. "Julian Mercer's sabotage has cost this company $12 million and nearly destroyed your relationship with Jennings Logistics," I said. "But the system is now stable. I have restored the load cycling protocol. The server temperatures are back to 52 degrees. Now we will discuss my terms." I pushed a copy of my revised contract across the table. 1. Apex Digital Architecture LLC retains full ownership of the biomimetic computing patents and software code, granting the company a non-exclusive, perpetual license. 2. I will be appointed as the Chief Innovation Officer, reporting directly to the board with complete authority over the technical infrastructure. 3. I receive a 15% royalty on all system implementations, both existing and future. 4. I receive a permanent seat on the board of directors. And 5. Audrey Collins is demoted to regional operations, with her replacement to be chosen by the board. This is my final offer. If you do not accept, I will withdraw the software license immediately and file for an injunction, and nearly destroyed your relationship with Jennings Logistics, I said. But the system is now stable. I have restored the load cycling protocol. The server temperatures are back to 52 degrees. Now we will discuss my terms. I pushed a copy of my revised contract across the table. 1. Apex Digital Architecture LLC retains full ownership of the biomimetic computing patents and software code, granting the company a non-exclusive perpetual license. 2. I will be appointed as the Chief Innovation Officer, reporting directly to the board with complete authority over the technical infrastructure. 3. I receive a 15% royalty on all system implementations. 4. I receive a permanent seat on the board of directors. And 5. Audrey Collins is demoted to regional operations, with her replacement to be chosen by the board. The board members spent 3 hours in closed-door discussions, consulting their corporate attorneys and the private equity representatives. They knew they had no choice. If they refused my terms, Jennings Logistics would walk away, the other healthcare clients would file lawsuits for breach of contract, and the federal government would pull their system certifications. My technology had saved the company twice, once from Mercer's internal sabotage and once from the database corruption. In the end, they accepted every single one of my terms. The contract was signed, and I was officially appointed as the Chief Innovation Officer. Audrey Collins accepted her demotion without protest, knowing it was the only way to avoid being named as a co-defendant in the upcoming corporate espionage lawsuit. The board members looked at each other. They knew they had no choice. If I walked away, the company's stock would crash. The private equity firm would sue them for fraud, and the system would remain vulnerable without its architect. Ellis picked up a pen. "We accept your terms, Roger," he said, signing the contract. "We apologize for the way you were treated." I took the signed document, handed it to Valerie, and stood up. I walked down to the lobby. As I exited the elevator, I saw Julian Mercer being led out in handcuffs by 2 plainclothes federal agents. He looked disheveled, his expensive tie crooked, his eyes wide with terror. He saw me, but I did not say a word. I simply watched him go. 6 months later, I stood on the stage at the Chicago Technology Symposium, accepting the annual Innovation and Resilience Award. The applause was loud, filling the large auditorium. In the front row, my daughter Clara Hennessy was smiling, holding her phone up to record the speech. Next to her sat Ellis and the new chief executive officer of the company, both clapping warmly. I looked at the microphone and began my speech. "The natural world is built on cycles," I said. "Day and night, activity and rest. When we build digital systems, we must respect those same laws of thermodynamics. A system that never rests is a system that is designed to fail. True innovation is not about pushing hardware until it breaks to satisfy a slide deck. It is about creating sustainable, resilient architecture that endures." From the back of the room, I saw Audrey Collins watching, her expression unreadable. She had accepted her demotion, knowing it was the only way to avoid the legal fallout of Mercer's espionage. I did not feel any anger toward her anymore. The systems I built had protected the company, and in the end they had delivered justice. My company, Apex Digital Architecture LLC, was now licensing my patented cycling protocols to 3 major tech firms, bringing in millions in royalties. As I walked off the stage, holding the heavy glass award, my phone buzzed in my pocket. System alert. The servers at Zenith Systems, our main competitor who had conspired with Mercer, were experiencing a massive cascading thermal failure. Their always-on architecture had finally overheated. I smiled, putting my phone away. Sometimes you do not need to seek revenge. Sometimes the laws of physics do it for you.